In just 2 weeks after becoming Pope, Pope Leo XIV ignited a storm of controversy with a single statement. He entered the Vatican not just taking on its role, but stepping into a web of cultural conflicts that had been simmering for years. His awakening to this reality was particularly vivid and intertwined with LGBTQ+ issues. Let me take you back to July 1987. Chicago was hot and chaotic. The heat hung heavily in the air, mingling with the shrill sounds of sirens. A 15-year-old named Ray was shot just 2 blocks from the seminary where I was living. I, then Father Robert Faust, had just finished my evening prayers when I heard the tragic news. They described Ray as a bright kid. But what resonated with me wasn't the coverage. It was the quiet words of a fellow priest whispering, "May God have mercy," as he continued on his way. In that moment, something in me snapped. I couldn't just walk away. That summer, I dove headfirst into a world that many priests shunned. I didn't just bury myself in books on theology. I ventured into neighborhoods where pain and grief filled the streets. I met mothers who held rosaries tightly in one hand and police reports in the other, navigating their heartbreak with unwavering faith. I stood outside liquor stores, offering prayers to anyone who seemed open to it. Some shrugged me off, while others poured out their stories. I'll never forget a man who questioned if God even understood the agony of burying a child. That night, I penned in my journal, "If the church only speaks in cathedrals, it's no longer the body, it's a brand." By January 1988, my journey had taken a new turn. I signed up for a mission abroad. Come March 1989, there I was on a drenched tarmac in northern Peru, a duffel bag slung over my shoulder, a Spanish Bible taped together, and a letter from my advisor urging me, "Don't try to save anyone, just serve." But the jungle? It wasn't a serene paradise with welcoming hymns. Instead, it overwhelmed me with sickness and exhaustion. On my first night, I found myself vomiting by the roadside thanks to altitude sickness. The trails weren't the smooth paths I imagined. They were treacherous rivers of mud where motorcycles often struggled and mules collapsed from fatigue. I watched local children, barefoot and sprightly, carry heavy jugs that dwarfed their small bodies. And amidst it all, I was just another stranger. No one knew my name. Eventually, I reached my first parish, Ayabaca, where there had been no priest for 6 long months. The chapel, battered and worn, bore the marks of violence with bullet holes in the walls. As I stood there, surrounded by such stark realities, I knew my journey was just beginning. The church was in disarray, its altar hidden beneath a tarp after the roof collapsed in the last storm. Many wondered why I even came to this place. You see, I wasn't the first white, educated man with a smile to arrive here, share a message, and then simply vanish. But I, Father Robert Prevost, who would eventually be known as Pope Leo XIV, chose to stay. I remained through the waves of malaria, the unsettling disappearances of 2 catechists after a nearby guerrilla raid, and the town's sorrow when the mayor's son fell ill due to the lack of medicine. It was a painful journey that ultimately humbled me, shattering me in the process, only to be reformed by the community I thought I was there to uplift. One person in particular touched my heart. Dona Pilar, a widow with 3 children who limped along as if her feet betrayed her. Every Sunday she would make the arduous 5-mile trek just to sweep the chapel floor. She struggled with the language and had her doubts about me, but one day she approached with a bowl of rice and delivered a powerful message. "Father," she said, "if you're not willing to suffer with us, don't pray for us." Her words hit me hard. I didn't have a reply. I was at a loss. That night, I took off my shoes and didn't wear them again for 3 months, unless the villagers weren't wearing theirs. My time here wasn't about issuing solutions. It was about walking alongside them through suffering and struggle. I began baptizing children by the muddy river, celebrating Mass in sunlit courtyards, and spending hours just listening, really listening, to the concerns and stories of the people. One evening in October 1991, I stood with young catechists under a tin roof after burying a 10-year-old girl who had succumbed to a stomach infection. I shared a thought that has stuck with them ever since. If the church stops telling the truth, we're just a group therapy session with candles. I believed that truth resided not just in Scripture, but in the sacrifices we make for one another. I witnessed how easy it was for falsehoods to flourish in exhaustion. Politicians made grand promises for clean water but never returned. Fathers would vanish without a trace, while I heard whispers about priests who turned a blind eye to the sins of the wealthy while harshly judging the poor. Yet, despite all this, I held tightly to my belief that truth, even when it hurt, was a form of love. As I prepared to leave Ayabaca in 1994, I delivered one of my final sermons. Standing before 60 villagers beneath a sky heavy with impending rain, I spoke, my lips cracked and eyes weary. Truth is not a weapon, it's a wound that heals. If I ever forget that, then I don't deserve to be called father. There were no applause from the crowd. However, one boy, moved by the moment, laid his machete at my feet, a gesture that spoke volumes. It was a day that would change history. May 13th, 2025, Tuesday in Rome. The atmosphere was charged around St. Peter's Basilica, draped in soft gray skies that matched the restless energy of the crowd below. Just moments before, the white smoke had signaled a new pope, and when the cardinal emerged on the balcony, the powerful Latin words Leo Papadecimus Quartus echoed through the square. In that instant, the world paused. What followed was nothing short of surreal. An American, a first for the papacy, was now Pope Leo XIV. The crowd erupted, their cheers filling the air, but the reverberations of that moment were felt far beyond Rome. In no time, headlines were lighting up screens. CNN announced, "A new era begins," while The Guardian proclaimed, "From Chicago to the Vatican, a pope for the people." And as usual, Twitter buzzed with excitement, hastily declaring, "The church is finally going liberal." It was strange knowing that people were already shaping their expectations around him, building him into a figure he had never claimed to be. They saw the sandals he wore, and they remembered his compassionate acts, like that time in 1997 when he visited a dying priest in Lima, walking barefoot into a crumbling mud house while others waited in the car. Compassion, they thought, must mean compromise. In the wake of his selection, progressive Catholics were celebrating, posting tearful videos online. At last they felt seen, convinced that this pope would bless every family. Rainbow flags were lovingly hung in a small parish in San Francisco next to holy water fonts, and one priest boldly shared during Mass, "God has given us a shepherd who understands love is love." And yet, Behind the scenes, the man in white wasn't reveling in the adoration. Instead, he found himself in the quiet sanctuary of the Apostolic Palace's private chapel, kneeling with his forehead against the wood of the pew. "Do not let me lie to be loved," he murmured, his voice nearly a whisper. He understood the hopes and dreams that the crowd projected onto him, but was acutely aware of the weight such expectations carried. Long before the cheers rang out, he was simply Father Robert, just a man with muddy feet and a borrowed Bible shaped by the lessons learned outside the walls of the Vatican. He carried with him the memories of a people who valued his presence more than his title, and he knew the price of silence and the consequences of compromise. Pope Leo XIV wasn't one to simply go with the flow. He felt his role was to be the anchor amidst the tides of change. That night, as fireworks illuminated the skies over Rome, thousands gathered in the square, lighting candles in a show of hope. Some bore signs saying, "Hope has a name," while others waved flags, some national, others in vibrant rainbow colors. Nearby, a small group of elderly nuns from Argentina sat quietly, their rosaries clutched in their hands. One of the nuns leaned over to a reporter, softly saying in Spanish, "He will love them, but he will not lie to them." Meanwhile, back in the quiet of his office above the jubilation, Pope Leo XIV, dressed in his simple white cassock, absorbed a handwritten note left on the edge of his desk by an anonymous aide. It contained a profound message. "The world wants a mirror. You were chosen to be a window." As the city celebrated and countless Catholics around the globe felt a resurgence of joy, the Pope gazed out from his balcony. He watched the festive lights twinkle, heard the cheers, and captured the tears below, and silently prayed, "Father, let me speak what is true, even if it empties this square." There was no official decree issued yet. No media interviews had been conducted. By dawn, however, an idea had already started to ripple through the church, a notion that Pope Leo XIV might change the traditional teachings, that he might embrace what felt good, that he could potentially bend the rules. But they didn't know him well. They had forgotten about the years he spent in Peru, the sermons he delivered under metal roofs, or the sandals left at the foot of broken coffins. They saw an American filled with warmth and hope, but what they didn't grasp yet was that truth often doesn't resonate with applause. Just 5 days later, cheers morphed into simmering anger. On a particularly tranquil Friday morning, May 17, 2025, Vatican City buzzed with anticipation. The halls of the Apostolic Palace were alive, bursting with the energy of clergy, security personnel, and translators double-checking final details. Flags from over 100 nations danced lightly outside the Grand Salisaria, where popes traditionally hold meetings with heads of state. Yet, amidst all that history, there was a palpable tension in the air. At exactly 9 o'clock a.m., Pope Leo XIV approached the podium. He didn't offer a smile or a wave. Instead, he steadied himself, resting his hands on the lectern and allowing the room full of diplomats to settle. Once silence enveloped the space, he began to speak. His voice, calm yet commanding, filled the hall as he addressed them. "Excellencies, friends, the family as God designed it is founded on the stable union between one man and one woman. It all started with a moment that felt deceptively simple. Suddenly, a gravity filled the room, causing two pens to stop mid-sentence. A French ambassador raised her head slowly, while several delegates exchanged confused glances, wondering if they had just heard correctly. Pope Leo XIV began his statement with unwavering clarity. To distort that truth is to betray the soul of the gospel. No ambiguity, no compromise. His tone was devoid of anger or fear, yet it was resolute and unwavering. The atmosphere shifted significantly. A Spanish reporter lowered his camera, and a German bishop shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The Swiss ambassador, momentarily stunned, ceased translating and simply stared. In a quiet corner, a cardinal muttered, "Oh no, not today." Yet the Pope remained impassive. He didn't raise his voice, didn't soften his message, and didn't qualify his words. With a firm resolution, he closed the folder before him and stepped back, making it clear the message was delivered, without footnotes or further explanation. By 10 a.m., the repercussions began to reverberate online. A 12-second snippet of his speech surged through social media, captioned, "New Pope declares war on LGBTQ Catholics," amassing 1 million views by noon. By 2 p.m., the hashtag #NotMyPope started trending in 15 countries. One TikTok creator exclaimed, "He said no ambiguity. He said no compromise. That means people like me are out." Meanwhile, another user laid melancholy music over clips of burning rainbow flags, creating a powerful statement of discontent. Progressive parishes from places as far away as Los Angeles and Lisbon quickly put out urgent pleas for clarification. Some wondered if it had been an error, while others desperately sought an explanation from the Pope. But throughout it all, Pope Leo XIV remained silent. No tweets, no corrections, and no spokesperson attempting to quell the uprising. Just an unsettling silence. As the world outside erupted in protest that evening, Pope Leo XIV sat in his private study, absorbed in the Gospel of John. According to a Swiss guard, he paused over a particular line for nearly half an hour, reflecting on, "And because I have told you the truth, you do not believe me." Inside the Vatican, frustrations bubbled over among the officials. One aide suggested drafting a diplomatic clarification before the coming Monday. Looking steady in his resolve, Pope Leo XIV simply replied, "No clarification is needed for the truth." Outside the Vatican walls, the turmoil intensified, not with weaponry, but with social media posts, hashtags, and fervent headlines. In Boston, LGBTQ+ activists marched outside a cathedral, holding signs that read, "This isn't love." Back in Rome, a mural celebrating Pope Francis embracing a gay couple was defaced, now bearing the words, "Backwards Pope." The rift between the Vatican and many within the LGBTQ+ community widened, marking the beginning of a fierce cultural battle. In May 2025, the air felt heavy with anticipation as the world tried to grasp a mere 12 words spoken by Pope Leo XIV. Yet, amidst all the chatter, there he was, calmly retreating into prayer, recalling a poignant phrase he once scribbled in the margins of a journal during his travels in Peru. "I do not speak to be heard. I speak because the silence has become a lie, and the war had just begun." It wasn't always easy for him, and looking back to October 2012, I remember a crisp autumn day at the Michigan Diocesan Retreat House. The transformation of leaves outside into golden tones mirrored the shift happening within the church's walls. Almost 40 bishops and senior clergy were gathered there, engaged in a private discussion about faith amidst a changing cultural landscape. The atmosphere was far from hostile, but a palpable tension filled the room. Everyone wore smiles, yet you could tell they were walking on eggshells, each one grappling with the weight of the shifts taking place. Seated a bit distantly from most, Father Robert Post, who would later be recognized as Pope Leo XIV, held his coat neatly on his lap, fingers gently resting against his chin, sharing the burdens of silence. Throughout the earlier discussions, he hadn't said much. Others had taken the floor. One bishop enthusiastically endorsed inclusion theology, while another proposed that the Church entertain civil same-sex unions, calling them non-sacramental yet permissible. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. I recall one priest's voiced worry: "We must modernize or we'll fossilize," which seemed to capture the collective anxiety of their mission. Finally, Father Provost's gaze lifted, and when he spoke, his voice, though soft, commanded attention. "Popular culture teaches us to celebrate confusion," he stated, cutting through the tension, "even if it means leaving our children lacking truth, devoid of fathers or mothers." The room fell into a silence so deep it stung, much sharper than any outraged shout. But he pressed on. "We cannot trade clarity for applause. We aren't meant to mirror the world. We are meant to anchor it." Without targeting anyone specifically, he laid bare the crisis at hand, expressing his apprehension over the normalization of same-sex family structures, not with hatred, but with a genuine concern. And in that moment, it became clear. Pope Leo XIV wasn't afraid to voice difficult truths, understanding well the cost of clarity in a world so often eager for applause. A while back, I found myself in a conversation that really struck a chord. There was this one point when a prominent figure calmly asserted that every child deserves the opportunity to grow up with both a father and a mother. He emphasized that it's about more than just love. It's about the essential balance of masculinity and femininity as intended by God. It was a bold statement, and he elaborated on how these distinct gender roles, when muddled together, can lead to serious identity crises among our youth. He spoke passionately about the pain behind their quest for self-expression, pointing to rising suicide rates and the instability of fragmented families. It was alarming to hear him describe the Church's gradual shift into relativism, a state where right and wrong are blurred because people are too afraid to stand up for truth. At that moment, a priest tried to interject, but Father Prevost, with a raised hand, calmly asserted he wasn't dismissing love. Instead, he warned against buying into the notion that love should conform to worldly standards rather than divine principles. Despite his composed demeanor, there was a firmness in his voice that was powerful enough to silence a room. I couldn't help but think back to earlier times when a similar quality in him had persuaded adversaries to put down their weapons. Later at lunch, 2 bishops approached him, acknowledging his courage. He simply replied, with a touch of weariness, that he was tired of seeing the truth suffocate under the weight of polite indifference. That conversation didn't make headlines or go viral, but those present sensed that something had shifted within him. Father Robert Prevost wasn't easily categorized. He wasn't just a conservative or a liberal. He was grounded in his convictions. He warned that if we're so eager for love that we forget the importance of truth, we risk leaving people without anything solid to cling to. That's not helping. That's a betrayal. 13 years before things really exploded in May of 2025, the stage had been set. even if he wasn't in the white garments typical of his role yet. Fast forward to May 18, 2025. It was early morning, but the digital fires were already raging. The news that Pope Leo XIV had made a striking remark about marriage just 2 days earlier spread like wildfire. By Monday, every major Catholic news outlet was buzzing, and soon the secular media joined the frenzy. Questions flooded in. Would there be clarification? Was the Pope reconsidering his stance? Would his tone be softer during the upcoming homily? The response from the Vatican press office remained consistently muted. No comments were forthcoming. Inside Vatican City, the air was thick with silence. In the wake of a recent speech, emotions ran high within the Catholic community. One cardinal found himself surrounded by reporters after Vespers, visibly struggling to articulate his thoughts. Cameras captured him in that moment, fumbling his words as he addressed the controversy. While he noted that the Holy Father's statement might have been misinterpreted, he also acknowledged, "I cannot speak for him." Meanwhile, across the ocean in Buenos Aires, a young Catholic man was overcome with emotion, holding a sign that proclaimed, "He made us feel like orphans again." The online community quickly reacted, with one TikTok comment going viral, racking up over 600,000 likes within just a day. The message was piercing. He's not Francis, he's a wolf in sandals. It cut deeper than mere policy critiques. It felt like a personal attack. In response to this outcry, some voices within the Vatican urged for a swift damage control approach. They suggested that Pope Leo XIV release a brief statement, one that would showcase his compassion and remind everyone of his pastoral heart, something soothing amid the chaos. But when the Pope listened to their concerns, he simply posed a question that shifted the entire dynamic. Would you have asked Christ to edit the Sermon on the Mount if it upset the crowd? That ended the discussion. No tweets, no explanations, no rebranding. He went about preparing for Mass instead. On May 19, 2025, the atmosphere was electric, with over 10 million viewers tuning in from across the globe. As Pope Leo XIV ascended the altar steps of St. Peter's Basilica, he wore a simple white cassock and carried no script. His homily was brief, and he didn't play to the cameras or walk around. He stood firm, gazing at the crowd, which included pilgrims, clergy, journalists, and skeptics alike. In that moment, he stated, "If truth offends, let it offend. We do not serve the world, we serve God." His words fell into the quiet like a stone dropped into still water. A hush enveloped the room. Among the audience, a nun from Nairobi bowed her head, tears streaming down her face. Meanwhile, a man live streaming the Mass whispered, unaware his microphone was still on, "He's not backing down." And it was clear he wasn't. To Pope Leo XIV, this was not just a political chess match, it was deeply personal. He vividly recalled the broken teenage boys in Ayabaca who felt lost, unsure of their identity after their fathers abandoned them. He thought of the 19-year-old girl in Lima whose understanding of love was twisted, having never been taught the difference between intimacy and identity. He reflected on a generation led to believe that truth was optional, many of whom never returned when they discovered it wasn't. So when he spoke, it wasn't for approval. It was because the cost of silence had already been too great. In the pews, a seminarian made notes, underlining the powerful phrase, "We do not serve the world." In the quiet hours of May 20th, 2025, I found myself at Santa Marta Chapel, completely alone with my thoughts. A soft glow flickered through the window, and there I was, Pope Leo XIV, sitting barefoot and solemn, my head bowed low before the crucifix. No entourage or security detail accompanied me. It was just me and my prayers. In my hand, I held a crumpled piece of paper, its edges worn and the ink faded. But it didn't matter. I had memorized its contents long ago. This letter was special. Dated October 7th, 1993, it had traveled all the way from a small post office in northern Peru. The sender was a young man named XIV, who had once stood at the door of the mission house, battered and lost after being thrown out by his father for being gay. He arrived without shoes, alone, with only bruises and the weight of silence pressing down on him. Father Robert, before anyone knew me as Pope, gave him refuge, not through preachy lectures but with simple compassion. He placed a warm bowl of rice before XIV and said, "God doesn't unlove you, and I won't either." XIV stayed with us for just 2 nights, yet he left an indelible mark on my heart. Before departing, he asked if he could write something, and that act transformed into the letter I now held. I wasn't reminiscing about a moment of kindness. No, I was reflecting on the profound responsibility that comes with compassion. Just below the middle of the letter was a line that always struck me deeply. "You saved me even when your church wouldn't." As the tears rolled down my cheeks, they weren't tears of regret. They were tears of accountability. I understood then that I wasn't in conflict with my community. It wasn't about fighting against anyone. Instead, it was about refusing to deceive them. Some days, the weight of that silence felt heavier than any loud proclamation. I grappled with the idea that perhaps true leadership meant voicing the uncomfortable truths, even when the world urged me to remain quiet. In this moment, I couldn't help but question whether my unwavering stance, rather than being wrong, was simply a refusal to lie, to